Cushman, and I am a member of the Historic Committee of the Stratham Community Church. And as you may or may not know, next year, 2016, is the 300th anniversary of the town of Stratham and of Stratham Community Church. And so I have invited two men from our past to share with us this morning. Reverend Henry Russ, please come.
Good morning, all. Good morning. Nice to be with you this morning.
Reverend Russ, please take the pulpit and share with us something about yourself.
I would be happy to. It's been a long time, but it feels awfully good standing behind this pulpit again. Almost 300 years. I've aged well. Just to review some of the basics. I was born in 1686 in a small town about a day's ride south of here, a little town called Ipswich, Massachusetts. I grew up there, and in my late teens I went to Cambridge, Massachusetts to go to college at Harvard College. You may have heard of that place. I graduated in 1707 at the age of 21. I spent a few years in various positions around the Boston area, and then was called to Stratham in 1716 by a group of gentlemen who were trying to establish a church. I became pastor here that year, 1716, and I was officially ordained in 1718, and spent most of my adult life here in Stratham.
Reverend Russ, can you tell us something about the early history of the church?
Certainly. During the early history of the colonies, the church had to be established first before a town could be recognized. That's why Stratham Community Church was established in 1716, the same year as the town of Stratham. The church was used for both worship and for meetings of the town government. Everyone belonged to the church. It was certainly the center of town, and it was supported by the town government.
And where was the church located?
We're standing on the exact spot. Now, there was a bit of a controversy at the time. The selectmen had proposed putting this church down at what I believe you now call Bunker Hill Avenue and Portsmouth Avenue. But the Wiggin family had large landownings just north of the church, and they wanted the church to be closer to their land. So they proposed to the Board of Selectmen, or the town selectmen, could they move the church about a quarter-mile north of where it was proposed. They said if they do that, they would give land to the church for the parsonage farm. The selectmen took that deal, and they moved the church to this exact spot. The town was then given the land by a Daniel Levitt to build the meeting house. And this, as an aside, was called a meeting house, not the church. It was used as the church and as the meeting house for all of the town of Stratham. It was a much smaller building. We had horse barns behind the church, or the meeting house. In fact, as I was walking in this morning, Mrs. Cushman, I noticed there were no horse barns in the rear of the church. I certainly hope the horses are not out in this cold weather.
Well, Reverend Russ, we don't travel much by horse and buggy anymore. We use cars.
Cars? What kind of a beast is that? What do they eat?
You know, that's a long story, so why don't we save that for after the service?
All right, well, that's all right. I'll be very interested to hear about these so-called cars. Now, Mrs. Good, why was it necessary to change the size of this building? We had a beautiful building when we built here. It was the perfect size for the town of Stratham.
In 1716, yes, but the town and the church grew. By 1768, we needed a larger building, so they took down the building that you helped to build and erected another one on the same foundation. And then the years went by and the town and the church grew again. And so in 1837, this building was built, although it was a little bit smaller than it is today.
Well, what about these buildings I noticed on the right over here?
Oh, well, the largest building, that was formerly the Stratham Baptist Church.
Baptist Church?
After your time, the Baptists came to Stratham, and they were here for about 200 years, starting in about 1770, and they were very active and contributed a lot to our community. But their numbers grew smaller, and eventually they just decided to come to our church. And so they gave their building to us. It was located about a half a mile further down Portsmouth Avenue, toward Portsmouth actually. And in 1981, we were able to move that building up to its present site, and that gave us a lot more room. Actually, we had used the building where it was for Sunday school, but we found that by moving the building closer to the church, it was more likely that when the children went to Sunday school, the parents would actually come to church.
Did you connect them at the time?
Oh, no, we had to save up for that. It took us until 1998 when we did the connector, which gave us room for more Sunday school, church office, a thrift shop, and now a preschool.
We arrived here at about 10 this morning, a little before. And I would assume that all of these parishioners have been here since 7 or 8 this morning, and probably be here till 5, as it was when I was preaching here.
Another small change. We don't come for all day anymore. An hour. We come for an hour. That's if Reverend Diane doesn't get carried away with her sermon.
Excuse me. Reverend Diane? I would assume that's her last name, or pastor's last name. You certainly don't have a female pastor.
Well, actually, we do. There are many female pastors in the United Church of Christ, as well as other denominations. We pride ourselves on having both male and female ministers. In fact, you might be interested to know that I read in the Globe the other day that the Old South Church in Boston has a female minister.
Oh, how things have changed. Well, it would not have been the case in my day. The men were in charge of everything, including the religious leadership.
And thankfully that has changed.
Well, look who's here. It's my friend, Captain Andrew Wiggin. Please, come join us.
Pleasure to be invited today.
Now, Captain Wiggin, no, I know you're free to sit anywhere you want in the sanctuary, but please, come forward. I'm sure the people here would love to hear from you.
Captain Wiggin, please tell us something about yourself.
I will make this short. I understand that some of today's Wiggins have a tendency to tell long stories. My family was one of the original families in what was to become Stratham. We were given by Governor Wentworth a large tract of land, but with permission of the King of England. We were farmers, as most everyone else was in the town at that time. And because I was the largest landowner in town, the selectmen, through a vote at town meeting, allowed me the opportunity to sit wherever I chose in the meeting house. I thought that was certainly the proper thing to do. I assume that the leaders of the church and the town who normally sit in the front seat are still assigned those seats. I was just wondering if there's some tragedy or something that's happened that has called him away from church today.
Well, actually, no, not that I'm aware of. I haven't heard the siren this morning. The town leaders don't typically sit in the front pew or come to church for that matter. In fact, it's pretty hard to get anyone to sit in the front pew.
In my time, there was a very specific list of where everyone sat. In 1717, Mr. Thomas Vesey, Thomas Rollins, and Jonathan Wiggin were appointed by the selectmen to award the seating arrangement in the meeting house. As I mentioned, I was given the liberty to sit in whatever seat I wanted in the meeting house. Everyone else was assigned a specific seat. Of course, the gentleman sat in the front, and the lady sat in the back with the children.
Well, once again, a change. We do not segregate men and women. Everyone is equal and willing and able to sit wherever they please. We don't assign seats anymore, but, you know, I have to admit, some of us sit in the same pew every Sunday, and we sort of consider it to be our own, although we don't pay for it.
This is really getting confusing. I assume that everyone is still obligated to build and maintain their pew. Oh, well, they don't have a pew, but a pew to maintain that and the windows that are abutting the pews like we used to.
No.
May I ask if there are any of the families of the original Stratham family still in the church or the town? Families like Merrill, England, Stockbridge, Scammon, Barker, Wiggin.
Yes?
Shout them out! The Scammons are here, the Stratham Patriots.
Mark? Merrill. Merrill, yeah.
That is wonderful. They are all very fine families. I must admit that I had a very strong leaning and I really appreciated the Scammon family when they moved into Stratham.
Well, the Scammons have certainly been active over the years, and they were one of the early land grant owners, weren't they, Doug? And of course, Floss Wiggin is very active in town and church, and she's sitting in the choir this morning, but as a Wiggin, I guess we wouldn't deny her the privilege to sit anywhere she wanted.
You all might be interested to know that the assignment of those pews was backed up by an order of the town, and that every person that was seated had to sit in their assigned seats, or they would pay 5 shillings per day for every day they sat out of their seats in a disorderly manner to try to advance themselves in the meeting house. Now, speaking with Mrs. Cushman, we believe that's the about equivalent of $30 in today's dollars, whatever dollars are.
Just think of it. You have to pay if you don't show up or sit in the wrong seat.
Mrs. Cushman, I assume that the selectmen still provide enough funds to take care of the church expenses and pay for the salary of the pastor.
No, that's another change, and that's a big one. After your time, gentlemen, about 1776, the 13 colonies, we had what we call a Revolutionary War, and we fought with England, and we became a separate country, the United States of America. Actually, it's been a very positive thing. We have a great country of which we are extremely proud. One of the foundations of our new country, however, was a distinct separation of church and state. So the church is on its own. We, the people, support the church. The town and the federal government do not support the church in any way. Speaking of money, how much were you paid to be the minister here?
That is a personal question, but the town was very generous to me. In the first year I was paid £60, 70 in the second, and 80 in the third. Now I understand the equivalent would be about $7,500 that first year, and just under $10,000 for the third year. I was also given £100, which equates to about $12,000, spaced over 4 years in order to build my house. And then in the subsequent years, they became more generous and gave me £6, which was about $800, so that I could buy my firewood.
I thought he was very well paid.
I thought you would.
Diane, $10,000 and some firewood in your third year. Can we talk about that? No, maybe not. Maybe not.
How often do the selectmen meet here at the church?
Not very. Actually, with that separation of church and state that I told you about, the town doesn't meet here anymore. But actually, they did continue to have town meeting and selectmen's meetings here until about 1887, downstairs in the basement in what we called Jackson Hall. But then in about the late 1880s, they built a new town hall. We know it today as Town Hall Antiques. And the town government moved down there. And so the church renovated the basement and named it the Henry Rust Room. Obviously, obviously in honor of your longevity. How long were you the minister?
Well, I was the pastor here until I passed away. In 1749. That was a little over 30 years. And certainly there were many happy times, and there were some sad times in those 31 years. The saddest when I lost my beloved wife Anna in 1734 at the tender age of 35. It was at that time that the town selectmen agreed to let me be the pastor for as long as I chose to be.
Reverend Rust, I remember a time in 1742 when some rascals tried to get the selectmen to remove you.
I remember that one well, yes.
They did not like your sermons.
I never understood that.
The group was a part of a revival of religion in New England. They went to the selectmen and asked for a town meeting to have you let go and hire someone new. After much discussion, a Mr. Dudley Levitt was hired to preach part of the time to the Stratham church here. To those in the congregation who know their history, the Stratham history, you know that not much more is known about Mr. Levitt after that, except for some case law that came up against it.
Reverend Rust, is there anything else you'd like to share with the congregation while you have the pulpit?
Yes, there is, and I thank you for that opportunity. Captain Wiggin and I have been so pleased to be here with you this morning, and there's certainly been many individuals and families that have called Stratham Community Church their church home for many years. And there have certainly been many changes that have taken place in that 300 years. And I'm sure there will be many more changes in the next 300. And I'm sure that also there were some ups and downs through that history, like any church has. There have been some disappointments, but there's been many, many more celebrations. And over the years, the congregation that was responsible for the well-being of the church in that particular point in time stepped up and did its part to be sure that Stratham Community Church would be around and vibrant for the next generation. I applaud all those that came after me, all those that came before you, and certainly all of you. We've learned that this Stratham Church has been and continues to be an integral part of the fabric of Stratham community. I'm happy to have been but a small part of that history. And I encourage each of you to think about how you can continue to help Stratham Community Church build upon that rich history. Each of you, whatever your age, you can make a difference in the life of this church. In closing, let me just say that we come here to learn about the teachings of Jesus. We pride ourselves on following Jesus' footsteps to help those that are in need, whether they're in our congregation, in the greater Stratham community, or beyond. It's one of the key missions of this church.
Reverend Rust, Captain Wiggin, thank you so much for coming and sharing your history and the history of our church.
Thank you, Mrs. Cushman. Captain, it's been nice seeing you after all these years. Great. And to all of you, thank you for coming this morning. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I hope that we can continue our conversation downstairs after the service.
In the Henry Rust room.
Oh, Henry Rust room, that has a fine ring to it.
Isn't that awesome? That was all day Friday.
Very good.
Wow.
That was wonderful.
Isn't that awesome? Hey, good actors. I'm going to get them to preach.
Edward Hilton. Yes, he went into Newfield. He had the land of Stratham, the patent, sold it to Wiggin's Men's, and then bought land.
Your mother and father.
My mom. Yes, the Scattercourt pioneers. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
What are we watching today?
What
do you think?
Hey.
Oh,
Good to see you.
I'll both follow it. Get both of them.
Great, Grammy! Grammy, it's good to see you! Great.
I tried, I knew I'd have some good looking great men. How is it to be so young?
It's not easy.
How many grapes? Can we get a picture of you in the middle of the three of you? How many grapes? David.
About 6.
6 grapes? Excuse me. Oh, that makes sense. 300 years, 6 generations.
Mom's taking pictures, I think.
Good.
Yeah.
Well,
good. How are you?
Excellent.
6 grapes.